What began as a routine parking violation quickly escalated into a tense standoff with the city's powerful new mayor, only to erupt into a deadly betrayal from within. The Tuesday afternoon, sun beat down on the asphalt, shimmering off the hood of my patrol car. Another heat wave, another day of bureaucratic nonsense, and I was stuck dealing with parking violations in the historic district. My name is Officer Miller, and usually I deal with mundane stuff. Illegally parked delivery vans, tourists blocking the fire lanes. Today, though, felt different. There was a low-level hum of tension in the air, the kind that precedes a full-blown storm. I spotted the car immediately, a sleek obsidian black sedan, parked directly in front of the main entrance of the municipal building, the very building where City Hall was located. It was a clear, egregious violation of the no-stopping zone, marked boldly with bright yellow paint and signage that even a blind squirrel could navigate. I pulled up slowly, my internal monologue already rehearsing the necessary paperwork. No placards, no temporary passes visible, just an expensive car disrespecting city code. I got out, the leather of my duty belt creaking slightly in the oppressive heat. I walked around to the driver's side, ready to check for ID or a hastily scribbled note explaining the emergency. The windows were tinted, almost completely opaque. I rapped my knuckles sharply against the glass. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time, leaning in close enough to catch a faint, expensive perfume scent wafting from the interior. Still nothing. "Ma'am? Sir? You are illegally parked in a restricted zone. I need you to move your vehicle immediately, or I will have to issue a citation and arrange for a tow." My voice, usually firm and even, felt slightly strained under the sun. Silence. Then a slow, almost deliberate movement inside. The driver's side window began to descend, inch by agonizing inch, as if the mechanism itself were fighting the heat. As the gap widened, I braced myself for an angry executive, maybe a high-powered lawyer late for a meeting. What I saw stopped me dead. Behind the wheel was a woman. She was impeccably dressed in a crisp ivory linen suit that looked both powerful and cool. Her hair, a cascade of dark curls, was pulled back severely, accentuating high cheekbones and eyes that, even in the dim light of the car's interior, seemed to hold an immense, unnerving intelligence. She didn't look angry, exactly. She looked patient. The kind of patience that implies you've already wasted enough of her precious time. "Officer," she said, her voice a low alto, smooth as aged whiskey. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, acknowledging my presence like one might acknowledge a minor inconvenience. "Ma'am, I need you to understand this is a critical no-stopping zone. I've given you fair warning. I'm calling the tow truck now." I reached for my radio, my hand already feeling the familiar weight of the plastic mic. She didn't move, just watched me, her expression unreadable. "A tow? Already?" "Officer, I just stepped inside for 1 minute to confirm a signature on an urgent document. I apologize if my arrival was poorly timed, but this building is where I work." "Ma'am, where you work doesn't supersede city ordinance," I countered, trying to regain the professional footing I'd lost the second I saw her tailored suit. "Who are you, exactly?" She offered the faintest, almost condescending smile. "That's a very good question, officer. One that I suppose I should answer before you ruin my afternoon further." She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket. My hand instinctively dropped to the grip of my sidearm. In this line of work, you learn that expensive clothes often hide the most volatile tempers, or worse, weapons. My heart rate spiked. I could feel the sweat pooling under my vest. I held my breath, waiting for her to pull out a badge, a gun, or maybe just a silk handkerchief. What she withdrew was a laminated ID card, thicker than standard issue. She held it up toward the glass, not tossing it, not handing it over, just presenting it like a royal decree. I leaned in, squinting against the glare reflecting off the plastic. The photo was sharp, professional. My eyes scanned the bold lettering at the top. My brain registered the title first, then the name, and then the whole world seemed to tilt sideways. The ID read, "Mayor of the City of Censored City Name." Below that, in crisp, clean font, "Eleanor Vance." Eleanor Vance. The name had been dominating every news cycle for the past 3 weeks since her landslide victory. She was the youngest mayor this city had ever elected, the one who promised to clean up City Hall, the one whose campaign slogan was literally, "Respect the rules." My hand, which had been hovering near my weapon, began to shake violently. I felt a sudden, dizzying drop in blood pressure, the kind that makes the world go fuzzy at the edges. The noise of the city, the distant sirens, the rumble of traffic seemed to vanish, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I looked from the ID back to her face, which was now completely devoid of amusement. She was waiting. "Officer?" Mayor Vance prompted, her voice now possessing a razor-sharp edge I hadn't heard before. "Are you perhaps unaware of the new administration? Or perhaps you just don't care very much for parking regulations when they apply to me?" I tried to speak. My throat was dry, constricted. All the practiced professionalism, all the years of training, evaporated into the oppressive heat. I could feel my face flushing scarlet under my cap. I looked over my shoulder toward the flashing yellow lights of the incoming tow truck, which had just pulled around the corner, its driver already looking eager for an easy hookup. I was about to hook up the brand new mayor's car on her first week in office. I was about to become the single most infamous traffic cop in city history. I opened my mouth, intending to stammer an apology, to explain that I hadn't recognized her, that the tints were too dark. But before I could form a single coherent word, Mayor Vance looked past me, her eyes narrowing slightly. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked calculating. She glanced down at the ID card still resting in her manicured hand, then back at me, her expression hardening into something cold and dangerous. "Officer Miller," she stated, reading the name tag on my uniform with unnerving accuracy. "You seem distressed. Tell me, Officer Miller, how long have you been reporting directly to Chief Harrison on traffic enforcement details?" The way she said my name, Officer Miller, it wasn't a greeting. It was an indictment. It felt like she'd pulled my entire service record out of thin air and was reading the highlights reel directly into my soul. Chief Harrison. That was the landmine she'd just rolled over. Harrison and I had a history. He was the one who'd given me this beat, the one who'd told me to keep my head down and not stir the political pot, especially around the municipal building. He was also the one who had conveniently blocked my promotion 3 times. My shaking intensified. This wasn't about a parking ticket anymore. This was an ambush, or perhaps a test. A test I was currently failing spectacularly, while standing next to a tow truck driver who looked like he was ready to start filming for viral infamy. "Mayor Vance," I managed, my voice cracking slightly before I forced it lower. I apologize. I truly didn't recognize you. The tint on the windows, sir. Ma'am, I was following protocol. I wasn't aware Chief Harrison was routing me specifically through this sector today. He usually assigns the senior officers to this area. I tried to inject a tone of diligent adherence to the chain of command, hoping she'd see me as a loyal subordinate, not a threat. Mayor Vance slowly retracted the ID card, sliding it back into her jacket with the precision of a surgeon. The small sound of the laminated plastic clicking against the fine fabric felt deafening in the silence between us. "Chief Harrison," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. Her eyes held mine, unwavering. They were the color of dark amber, and they seemed to penetrate the thin veneer of my uniform. "He is currently on administrative leave, Officer Miller, effective this morning at 7 a.m. Did you not receive the departmental memo?" The air left my lungs in a sharp rush. Administrative leave? Harrison hadn't said a word. He'd given me my patrol route personally yesterday evening, his usual gruff self, complaining about paperwork. He wouldn't leave without telling his subordinates, not unless he was forced out. And Eleanor Vance, the reformer, was exactly the type to clean house on day 1. No, Mayor," I stammered, the reality of the situation slamming into me. I wasn't just dealing with a powerful woman. I was dealing with the epicenter of a massive silent political earthquake that had apparently happened while I was patrolling the outer suburbs. I was on duty before the standard office hours began. My direct supervisor, Sergeant Reynolds, he gave me the routing this morning. A flicker. Was it satisfaction? Regret crossed her face before it smoothed over again. "Sergeant Reynolds, I see. A loyalist to the old guard, no doubt. Well, Officer Miller, it appears you've stumbled into the middle of a rather significant transition. She paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the stifling air. You were about to have my vehicle towed. A car parked for less than 60 seconds in an illegally designated zone. A zone, I might add, that the previous administration conveniently forgot to remove the "no stopping" signs from, even after they rezoned this area last year. I know. I signed the ordinance reversing that decision yesterday afternoon. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that nevertheless carried immense authority. So, here is where we stand, officer. You were about to execute a very public, very petty act of enforcement against the new head of this city, an act that would have been perfectly legal under the old, unenforced standards, but which would look disastrously vindictive under the new standards I am implementing. Or you can recognize that you are operating on outdated information, and perhaps, just perhaps, show a small measure of discretion. The tow truck driver, sensing the delicate balance of power shifting, started revving his engine aggressively, hoping to hurry the interaction along. I understand, Mayor, I managed, pulling my hand away from my radio entirely, adopting a stance of absolute submission. I will stand down the tow. Citation withdrawn. I will notify dispatch immediately that the vehicle is clear. Mayor Vance nodded slowly, a gesture that felt less like acceptance and more like confirmation of a hypothesis. She had tested me, and I had passed the immediate stress test by not escalating. Good, she said, the single word resonating with finality. She reached for the electronic door lock switch, the small clack, sounding like the snapping shut of a vault door. The window began to roll up, threatening to seal me out entirely from this sudden, high-stakes negotiation. However, Officer Miller, she continued, stopping the window just halfway up, trapping me in a perpetual, agonizing state of anticipation. I appreciate you standing down the tow, but I am going to need to know exactly who ordered your patrol route this morning. Since Chief Harrison is indisposed, and Sergeant Reynolds is apparently lagging on communication, I need absolute clarity on who is currently directing the uniformed officers on the street. She fixed me with that terrifyingly intelligent gaze. Because if someone is intentionally misdirecting my patrol units, keeping them away from critical areas, or worse, setting them up for unnecessary conflicts with new city leadership, then they aren't just breaking rules, officer. They are actively undermining the democratic process. And that is something I prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. Tell me, Officer Miller, who else in the precinct knew where you were going this morning, besides Reynolds? I swallowed hard, realizing the trap. Telling her Reynolds was the source would put me on the immediate path to a commendation, a transfer, maybe even a shot at a promotion under the new regime. But Harrison was my protector, however flawed. If I threw Reynolds under the bus, Reynolds would know I did it, and he would ensure I never worked a day without harassment. If I protected Reynolds, I was tacitly protecting Harrison's operation, which now seemed to be actively working against the mayor. My mind raced calculating the political fallout of every possible answer. I took a deep breath, the decision crystallizing, fueled by a sudden sharp instinct for self-preservation, mixed with a terrifying curiosity about what this new era would look like. I looked directly into the mayor's eyes, ready to commit fully to one side or the other, when a frantic, garbled voice suddenly screamed through the police radio clipped to my shoulder. Unit 407, repeat. Unit 407, respond immediately to the intersection of Grand and 5th, officer down. Shots fired. I repeat, shots fired. This is an active shooter situation. Need backup now. The crackle of the radio, which had been a distant irritant moments before, suddenly became a physical shockwave, ripping through the charged silence between me and the mayor. Unit 407, repeat. Unit 407, respond immediately to the intersection of Grand and 5th. Officer down. Shots fired. I repeat, active shooter situation. Need backup now. The mayor's composure fractured instantly. The cool, calculating facade vanished, replaced by pure, unfiltered command adrenaline. She didn't even wait for me to acknowledge the dispatch. She slammed the window up the rest of the way, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Her eyes were wide, darting from my patrol car's dashboard display, which was now flashing red warnings for the emergency call, to the tow truck driver, who was now frozen mid-rev, and finally back to me. Grand and 5th, she stated, not questioning but confirming the location. That's 3 blocks from here. Miller, you heard that. That's an officer down. My training, buried under the anxiety of the political confrontation, violently surged back to the forefront. The internal debate about Harrison and Reynolds evaporated. An officer was down. That trumped everything. I ripped the microphone from my shoulder, my hands moving with practiced speed, adrenaline washing away the heat and the fear. Dispatch Unit 407 clear. I barked into the mic, my voice snapping into the authoritative tone I hadn't realized I'd lost. En route to Grand and 5th, Code 3, requesting immediate supervisor callback for incident review regarding personnel routing, but currently responding to officer down call. Advise status of assisting units. I threw the car into drive, tires squealing slightly as I wrenched the wheel around to face the direction of Grand Avenue. But as I started to move, Mayor Vance made a move that completely defied expectation. She didn't get out of her car. She didn't run toward the municipal building doors, presumably to command from the safety of her new office. Instead, Eleanor Vance threw her car into reverse with a violent jerk that nearly spun her around. She peeled backward out of the restricted zone, tires screeching, and then slammed on the brakes, pulling up not behind me, but parallel to my driver's side door, effectively boxing me in momentarily. "Miller," she yelled over the rising volume of the radio dispatch, updating the chaos. "I'm coming with you." I stared at her, utterly aghast. "Mayor, you absolutely cannot. This is an active shooter situation. You need to get to the safest location immediately." "Don't lecture me on safety, officer," she snapped, her face inches from my window glass. "I'm the mayor, and if an officer is shot in my jurisdiction, I am coming to the scene. It sends a message. It's political theater, yes, but it's also leadership. Besides," she leaned in, her voice dropping to that dangerously low register again, "if you think I'm going to let an officer who was about to ticket me take point on the most critical incident of my first day in office unsupervised, you are gravely mistaken." Before I could formulate a proper, department-mandated refusal, she had already produced a small black device from her glove compartment. It looked too sleek to be a standard-issue radio. She flipped a switch. "Dispatch, this is Mayor Vance," she announced, her voice cutting through the regular police chatter on my channel with sheer, unbelievable authority. Every police unit in the immediate vicinity, including the dispatcher, went dead silent. "I am overriding non-emergency communications. Unit 407 is en route to Grand and 5th. I am accompanying 407. Clear the lanes for us. Sergeant Reynolds, if you are monitoring this channel, I want full tactical reports sent directly to my personal encrypted line, not through the usual chain of command. Do you copy?" The silence that followed was profound. Even the background noise of the city seemed to hold its breath. Then a shaky voice, undeniably Sergeant Reynolds, crackled back. "Mayor Vance, copy that. Clear lanes confirmed, sending all data to your secure line now." This was beyond audacious. She hadn't just asserted authority, she had bypassed the entire command structure in a single 30-second broadcast. She had pulled the rug out from under Harrison and Reynolds, and she'd done it while sitting in a car she was seconds away from having towed. "Now, Officer Miller," she said, turning her attention back to me, her eyes blazing with manic intensity. "Drive. And when we get there, you take point on entry. I will cover your 6. The tow truck driver, sensing the true gravity of the situation, and perhaps recognizing the mayor's custom-built communication device, had wisely backed away and was now slowly pulling his vehicle to the curb. I slammed the accelerator. The patrol car roared to life, launching us toward the intersection of Grand and 5th. I kept glancing at the mayor in the passenger seat, expecting her to pull out a weapon, maybe even take the wheel. She just sat there, her expression hard, watching the city rush past, completely ready for a gunfight. As we rounded the final corner onto Grand Avenue, the scene exploded into chaos. Police cruisers were angled haphazardly, doors open, flashing their lights uselessly into the midday sun. A dark blue sedan, clearly the shooter's vehicle, was riddled with bullet holes, its engine smoking gently, and lying halfway out of the driver's side door of a marked patrol car, face down in the street, was a uniformed officer. We screeched to a halt 50 feet away from the carnage. Before I could even put the car in park, Mayor Vance was flinging her door open, not reaching for a concealed weapon, but pulling something else from beneath her seat. A heavy-duty trauma kit. "Miller, status report." "Where is the threat?" she demanded, already striding toward the downed officer, completely ignoring protocol that demands the highest-ranking official remain clear of the hot zone. I jumped out, drawing my service weapon, adrenaline surging. "No visual on the shooter, Mayor. Last update said, active. Stay back." I covered her as she knelt beside the injured officer, her expensive linen suit instantly coated with dust and grime. She ripped open the trauma kit, her movements surprisingly adept, and began applying high-pressure dressings to the officer's thigh. "It looks like a leg wound, Miller. Bad arterial bleed. Check the surrounding buildings. Is anyone securing the perimeter, or are they all just waiting for—" "My orders!" she shouted back at me, her voice sharp but steady, focused entirely on saving the man's life. I spun around, scanning the rooftops, the nearby storefronts, searching for the source of the attack. My weapon trained on the nearest doorway. That's when I saw it. Not a rooftop sniper, not a figure lurking in a doorway. It was coming from the alleyway directly beside the downed officer's car, a discarded high-powered rifle, still warm to the touch, resting against a stack of garbage bins. The shooter wasn't there. They had dropped the weapon and fled on foot. I started sprinting toward the alley, my focus entirely on the fleeing suspect, when a blinding sharp pain exploded in my right shoulder. It felt like being hit by a sledgehammer, wrapped in white-hot fire. I pitched forward, my weapon skittering across the pavement, the world immediately tilting into a nauseating slow-motion spiral. I heard a gasp, and I knew. It hadn't been the shooter. It had been too close, too sudden, and the shooter was supposed to be gone. My vision tunneled. The last thing I saw, before the overwhelming darkness claimed me, was Mayor Vance, standing over the bleeding patrolman, looking up from her urgent medical work, her face a mask of shock, staring directly at the source of the new gunshot, the abandoned rifle, and then, slowly, turning her horrified gaze toward the person who had just fired the shot that struck me down beside her. And it wasn't an unknown assailant. It was Sergeant Reynolds, standing halfway out of a police cruiser parked just behind us, his face contorted in a desperate, panicked snarl. His own service weapon aimed not at the mayor, but back at the downed officer he was supposedly trying to help. The sound of the second shot, the one that slammed into my shoulder, was distinct, sharper, closer than the initial exchange. It wasn't the chaotic discharge of a panicked gunman. It was a deliberate, targeted execution attempt. My body hit the asphalt hard, the impact momentarily stealing the remaining breath. The world dissolved into pain and confusion, the smell of hot oil, gunpowder, and blood mixing into a toxic cocktail. Through the agonizing haze, I saw the tableau of betrayal. Sergeant Reynolds, his face slick with sweat, standing halfway out of what should have been a backup unit, his service weapon still pointed, not at the mayor, who was kneeling over the first downed officer, but at the patrolman I had just rushed to assist. He hadn't been trying to help. He had been finishing the job. And then Mayor Vance moved. She didn't hesitate, didn't scream, didn't even check my wound. Her reaction was pure, lethal instinct honed by a lifetime of calculated risk. She moved like a striking viper, dropping the trauma dressing, not retreating to cover, but throwing herself sideways, dragging the first wounded officer, Officer Davies, I dimly realized from his unit number, further behind the relative safety of his own cruiser door. As she shielded Davies, she pulled a small, compact handgun from an ankle holster I never would have suspected existed beneath that tailored linen skirt. It was a move so fluid, so unexpected that Reynolds froze, his eyes widening in genuine terror for the first time. He had clearly expected me, the junior officer, to take the hit, perhaps even expecting the mayor to cower. He had not accounted for a mayor who was combat-trained. "Reynolds," Vance's voice sliced through the air, ice-cold and utterly devoid of emotion. "Drop your weapon. Now." Reynolds's composure shattered. He was trapped between two armed figures, a wounded colleague shielding another victim, and a mayor who was clearly prepared to use lethal force. His eyes darted between Vance's steady aim and the abandoned rifle near the dumpster, realizing the initial narrative he'd set up, an outside shooter, had completely collapsed. Mayor, wait. It's not what it looks like. Harrison, he told me. He said you were coming in too fast, trying to dismantle everything before the transition was official. He said you were a liability. I was just trying to secure the scene. Reynolds stammered, his grip tightening on his service weapon, wavering between surrender and fighting for his career, or his life. Harrison is on administrative leave for corruption, Sergeant, Vance stated flatly. And you just attempted to execute 2 officers and assault the sitting mayor of this city. You have 5 seconds. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The distant wail of approaching sirens, the real backup, was getting closer. Reynolds knew the game was up. His shoulders slumped, and with a ragged sigh of defeat, he slowly raised his hands, dropping his weapon with a heavy clatter onto the asphalt. Mayor Vance didn't relax her aim until the sound of the approaching backup filled the street. Only then did she allow herself a brief, shuddering breath. She immediately turned her attention back to me, sliding across the ground with surprising agility. "Miller, talk to me," she demanded, her voice now tight with urgency, but the raw command replaced by a more human concern. She pressed her hand firmly against my bleeding shoulder, ignoring the blood soaking through her expensive suit jacket. "Can you hear me? Talk to me." "Go down," I grunted out, tasting copper in my mouth. Harrison? He didn't know. It was Reynolds. He tried to set up a fake shooter scenario to discredit your transition. My vision was blurring again, but I forced myself to focus on her face. I think I'm hit bad, Mayor." "You're not going anywhere," she said firmly, pulling a fresh bandage from the trauma kit and expertly securing it over the wound, her fingers surprisingly gentle. "You're breathing. That's what matters. We're getting you airlifted, but first we secure the scene. You just took a bullet meant for me, Officer Miller. You saved my life." As the first wave of uniformed officers swarmed the intersection, clearly confused to find their sergeant in handcuffs and their new mayor covered in blood, Vance made her final move. She stood up, towering over the chaos, her ivory suit stained crimson, looking more like a warrior queen than a politician. She walked over to the still-cuffed Reynolds, who was being roughly pulled toward an ambulance by arriving officers. She stopped directly in front of him. "Sergeant Reynolds," she said clearly, ensuring every arriving officer and camera lens caught the moment. "When you receive your termination papers, be sure to mention that Officer Miller here will be receiving a commendation, full medical coverage, and an immediate promotion to detective pending recovery. And tell Chief Harrison," she paused, meeting the eyes of the arriving lieutenant, who looked utterly shell-shocked, "that I look forward to meeting him in person to discuss his immediate resignation." She turned, walked back toward me, and knelt down one last time as the paramedics rushed forward, finally taking over the immediate medical care. As they carefully maneuvered me onto the gurney, the last thing I saw clearly before the darkness took hold completely was Mayor Eleanor Vance, standing tall amidst the carnage, wiping a smear of my blood from her cheek with a silk handkerchief, her expression resolute. She hadn't just won a political battle. She had taken the city back, and she had earned the absolute, unwavering loyalty of the one officer dumb enough to almost ticket her and brave enough to stand beside her when the real bullets flew. The city was changing, and I, Officer Miller, was going to be at the very heart of it.